Hello, guys, welcome to Psych Minds. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, do subscribe, like, and share. We are reading Veronica Decides to Die by Paulo Coelho, page number 172. When Edward opened his eyes, the girl was still there. After his first electric shock sessions, he had had to struggle for a long time to remember what had happened. But then the therapeutic effect of the treatment lay precisely in that artificially induced partial amnesia which allowed the patient to forget the problems troubling him and to regain his calm. The more frequently electric shock treatment was given, however, the less enduring its effects. He recognized the girl at once. While you were sleeping, you said something about visions of paradise, she said, stroking his hair. Vision of paradise? Yes, visions of paradise. Edward looked at her. He wanted to tell her everything. But at that moment, however, the nurse came in with a syringe. You've got to have this now, she said to Veronica. Dr. Igor's order. I've already had some today, and I don't want any more, she said. What's more, I have no desire to leave here either. I refuse to obey any orders, any rules, and I won't be forced to do anything. The nurse seemed used to this type of reaction. Then I'm afraid we will have to sedate you. I need to talk to you, said Edward. Have the injection. Veronica rolled up the sleeves of her sweater and the nurse injected her with the drug. There's a good girl, she said. Now why don't the two of you leave this gloomy ward and go outside for a walk? You are ashamed of what happened last night, said Edward while they were walking in the garden. I was, but now I'm proud. I want to know about these visions of paradise because I came very close to having one myself. I need to look further beyond the buildings of Villette, he said. Go on then. Edward looked behind him, not at the walls of the wards or at the garden where the inmates were walking in silence, but at a street in another continent, in a land where it either rained in torrents or not at all. Edward could smell that land. It was the dry season. He could feel the dust in his nostril, and the feeling gave him pleasure, because to smell the earth is to feel alive. He was riding an imported bicycle. He was 17 and had just left the American college in Brasilia, where all the other diplomats' children studied. He hated Brasilia, but he loved the Brazilians. His father had been appointed Yugoslavian ambassador 2 years before, at a time when no one even dreamed of the violent division of their country. Milosevic was still in power. Men and women lived with their differences and tried to find a harmony beyond regional conflicts. His father's first posting was to Brazil. Edward dreamed of beaches, carnival, soccer matches, and music, but they ended up in the Brazilian capital, far from the coast, a city created to provide shelter only to politicians, bureaucrats, diplomats, and to their children who didn't quite know what to do, stuck in the middle of all that. Edward hated living there. He spent the day immersed in his studies, trying but failing to relate to his classmates, trying but failing to work up some interest in cars, the latest sneakers, and designer clothes, the only possible topic of conversation with the other young people. Now and then there would be a party where the boys would get drunk on one side of the room and the girls would feign indifference on the other. There were always drugs around, and Edward had already experimented with almost all the possible varieties, not that he could get very excited about any of them. He either got too agitated or too sleepy and immediately lost interest in what was going on around him. His family was concerned. They had to prepare him to follow in his father's footsteps. And although Edward had almost all the necessary talents, a desire to study, good artistic taste, a facility with languages, and interest in politics, he lacked one essential quality for a diplomat. He found it difficult to talk to other people. His parents took him to parties, told him to invite his school friends home, and gave him a generous allowance, but Edward rarely turned up with anyone. One day his mother asked him why he didn't bring his friends to lunch or supper. I know every brand of sneakers and I know the names of all the girls who are easy to get into bed. After that, there's nothing left to talk to them about. Then the Brazilian girl appeared on the scene. The ambassador and his wife felt better when their son began going out on dates and coming home late. No one knew exactly where she had come from, but one night Edward invited her home to supper. She was a well brought up girl, and his parents felt content. The boy had finally started to develop his talents for relating to other people. Moreover, they both thought, though neither actually said anything, that the girl's existence removed and one great worry from their minds. Edward clearly wasn't homosexual. They treated Maria, that was her name, with all the consideration of future in laws, even though they knew that in 2 years' time they would be transferred to another post, and they had not the slightest intention of letting their son marry someone from an exotic country. They had plans for him to meet a girl from a good family in France or Germany who would be a dignified companion in the brilliant diplomatic career the ambassador was preparing for him. Edward, however, seemed more and more in love. Concerned, his mother went to talk to her husband. The art of diplomacy consists in keeping your opponent waiting, said the ambassador. While you may never get over a first love affair, it always ends. But Edward seemed to have changed completely. He started bringing strange books home. He built a pyramid in his room and, together with Maria, burned incense every night and spent hours staring at a strange design pinned to the wall. Edward's marks at school began to get worse. The mother didn't understand Portuguese, but she could see the book covers, crosses, bonfires, hanged witches, exotic symbols. Our son is reading some dangerous stuff. Dangerous? What is happening in the Balkans is dangerous, said the ambassador. These rumors. There are rumors that Slovenia wants independence and that could lead us into war. The mother, however, didn't care about politics. She wanted to know what was happening to her son. What about this mania for burning incense? It's to disguise the smell of marijuana, said the ambassador. Our son has had an excellent education. He can't possibly believe that those perfumed sticks draw down the spirits. My son involved in drugs? It happens. I smoked marijuana too when I was young. People soon got bored with it. I did. His wife felt proud and reassured. Her husband was an experienced man. He had entered the world of drugs and emerged unscathed. A man with such strength of will could control any situation. One day, Edward asked if he could have a bicycle. We have got a chauffeur and a Mercedes Benz. Why do you want a bicycle? To be more in touch with nature. Maria and I are going on a 10-day trip, he said. There's a place near here with huge deposits of crystal, and Maria says they give off really positive energy. His father and mother had been brought up under a communist regime. To them, crystals were merely a mineral product composed of certain atoms and did not give off any kind of energy, either positive or negative. They did some research and discovered that these ideas about crystal vibrations were beginning to be fashionable. If their son started talking about such things at official parties, he could appear ridiculous in the eyes of others. For the first time, the ambassador acknowledged that the situation was becoming serious. Brasilia was a city that lived on rumors. And as soon as his rivals at the embassy learned that Edward believed in these primitive superstitions, they might think he had picked them up from his parents, and diplomacy, as well as being the art of waiting, was also the art of keeping up a facade of normality, whatever the circumstances. My boy, this can't go on, said his father. I have friends in the Foreign Office in Yugoslavia. You have a brilliant career as a diplomat ahead of you, and you have got to learn to face reality. Edward left the house and didn't come back that night. His parents phoned Maria's home as well as all the mortuaries and hospitals in the city, to no avail. The mother lost her confidence in her husband's abilities as head of the family, however good he might be at negotiating with complete strangers. The following day, Edward turned up, hungry and sleepy. He ate and went to his room, lit his incense sticks, said his mantras, and slept for the rest of that evening and night. When he woke up, a brand new bicycle was waiting for him. Go and see your crystals, said his mother. I'll explain to your father. And so on that dry, dusty afternoon, Edward cycled happily over to Maria's house. The city was so well designed, in the architect's opinion, or so badly designed in Edward's opinion, that there were almost no corners. He just kept straight on down a high-speed lane, looking up at the sky full of rainless clouds. Then he felt himself rising up at a tremendous speed towards the sky, only to plummet down again and land on the asphalt. Crash. I have had an accident. He tried to turn over, because his face was pressed against the asphalt, and realized he had no control over his own body. He heard the noise of cars braking, people talking in alarmed voices, someone approaching and trying to touch him, then a shout, "Don't move him! If anyone moves him, he could be crippled for life." The seconds passed slowly, and Edward began to feel afraid. Unlike his parents, he believed in God and in the afterlife, but even so, it seemed grossly unfair to die at 17, staring at the asphalt in a land not on his own. "Are you all right?" he heard someone say. No, he wasn't all right. He couldn't move, but he couldn't say anything either. The worst thing was that he didn't lose consciousness. He knew exactly what was happening and what his situation was. Why didn't he faint? At precisely the moment when he was looking for God with such intensity, despite everything and everyone, God had no pity on him. "The doctors are on their way," someone whispered to him, clutching his hands. "I don't know if you can hear me, but keep calm. It's nothing serious." Yes, he could hear. He would have liked that person, a man, to keep on talking, to promise him that it was nothing serious, even though he was old enough to know that people only say that when the situation is very serious indeed. He thought about Maria, about the place where there were mountains of crystals full of positive energy. Unlike Brasilia, which had the highest concentration of negativity he had ever encountered in his meditations. The seconds became minutes. People continued trying to comfort him, and for the first time since it all happened, he began to feel pain. A sharp pain that came from the center of his head and seemed to spread throughout his entire body. "They are here," said the man who was holding his hand. "Tomorrow you will be riding your bike again." But the following day, Edward was in the hospital with both his legs and one arm in casts, unable to leave for at least a month, and having to listen to his mother's non-stop sobbing, his father's anxious phone calls, and the doctor's reassurances, reiterated every 5 minutes that the crucial 24-hour period had passed and there was no injury to the brain. The family phoned the American embassy, which never believed the diagnosis of the state hospitals and had its own sophisticated emergency service, along with a list of Brazilian doctors it considered capable of attending its own diplomats. Now and then, as a part of a good neighbor policy, it allowed these services to be used by other diplomats. The Americans brought along their state-of-art machines, carried out a further barrage of tests and examinations, and reached the conclusion they always reached. The doctors in the state hospital had correctly evaluated the injuries and had taken the right decisions. The doctor in the state hospital may have been good, but the programs on Brazilian television were as awful as they were anywhere else in the world, and Edward had little to do. Maria's visit to the hospital became more and more frequent. Perhaps she had found someone else to go with her to the Crystal Mountains. In contrast to his girlfriend's erratic behavior, the ambassador and his wife went to see him every day but refused to bring him the Portuguese books he had at home, on the pretext that his father would soon be transferred, so there would be no need to learn a language he would never have to use again. Edward therefore contented himself with talking to the other patients, discussing football with the nurses, and devouring any magazines that fell into his hands. Then one day a nurse brought him a book he had just been given but that he judged much too fat to actually read. And that was the moment that Edward's life began to set him on a straight path, one that would lead him to Villette and to his withdrawal from reality, and that would distance him completely from all the things other boys his age would get up to in the years that followed. The book was about visionaries whose ideas had shaken the world, people with their own vision of an earthly paradise, people who had spent their lives sharing their ideas with others. Jesus Christ was there, and so was Darwin and his theory that man was descended from the apes. Pruitt affirming the importance of dreams, Columbus spawning the Queen's jewels in order to set off in search of a new continent, Marx with his belief that everyone deserved the same opportunities. And there were saints too, like Ignatius Loyola, a Basque soldier who had slept with many women and killed many enemies in numerous battles, until he was wounded at Pamplona and came to understand the universe from the bed where he lay convalescing. Teresa of Avila, who wanted somehow to find a path to God and who stumbled across it when she happened to walk down a corridor and paused to look at the painting. Anthony, who, weary of the life he was leading, decided to go into exile in the desert, where he spent 10 years in the company of demons and was racked by every conceivable temptation. Francis of Assisi, a young man like himself who was determined to talk to the birds and to turn his back on everything that his parents had planned for his life. Having nothing better to do, he began to read the Fat Book, that very afternoon. In the middle of the night, a nurse came in asking if he needed help, since his was the only room with the light still on. Edward waved her away without even looking up from the book. The men and women who shook the world were ordinary men and women like him, like his father, like the girlfriend he knew he was losing. They were full of the same doubts and anxieties that all human beings experience in their daily routine. They were people who had no special interest in religion or God, in expanding their minds or teaching a new level of consciousness, until one day they simply decided to change everything. The most interesting thing about the book was that it told how, in each of those lives, there was a single magical moment that made them set off in search of their own vision of paradise. They were people who had not allowed their lives to pass by unmarked, and who, to achieve what they wanted, had begged for alms or courted kings, used diplomacy or force, flouted laws, or faced the wrath of the powers that be, but who had never given up and were always able to see the advantages in any difficulty that presented itself. The following day, Edward handed over his gold watch to the nurse who had given him the book and asked him to sell it, and with the money to buy all the books he could find on the same subject. There weren't any more. He tried reading the biographies of some of the visionaries, but they were all always described as if they were someone chosen, inspired, and not an ordinary person who, like everyone else, had to fight to be allowed to say what he thought. Edward was so impressed by what he had read that he seriously considered becoming a saint and using the accident as an opportunity to change the direction of his life. But he had two broken legs. He had not had a single vision while in the hospital. He hasn't stopped by a painting that shook him to his very soul. He had no friends who would build him a chapel in the middle of the Brazilian plateau. And the deserts were all far away and bristling with political problems. There was, however, something he could do. He could learn to paint and try to show the world the visions those men and women had experienced. When they removed the cast and he went back to the embassy surrounded by all the care, kindness, and attention that the son of an ambassador could hope for from other diplomats, he asked his mother if he could re enroll in a painting course. His mother said that he had already missed a lot of classes at the American school and that he would have to make up for lost time. Edward refused. He did not have the slightest desire to go on learning about geography and sciences. He wanted to be a painter. In an unguarded moment, he explained why. I want to paint visions of paradise. His mother said nothing but promised to talk to her own friends, her women friends, and ascertain which was the best painting course available in the city. When the ambassador came back from work that evening, he found her crying in her bedroom. Our son is insane, she said, her face streaming with tears. The accident has affected his brain. Impossible, the ambassador replied, indignant. He was examined by doctors specially selected by the Americans. His wife told him what her son had said. It's just youthful rebelliousness. Just you wait, everything will go back to normal, you will see. But this time, waiting did no good at all. Because Edward was in a hurry to start living. 2 days later, tried to making time while his mother's friends deliberated, he decided to enroll himself in an art course. He started learning about color and perspective, but he also got to know people who never talked about sneakers or makes of cars. He's living with artists, said his mother tearfully to the ambassador. Oh, leave the boy alone, said the ambassador. He will soon get sick of it, like he did of his girlfriend. He did of crystals, pyramids, incense, and marijuana. But time passed and Edward's room became an improvised studio full of paintings that made no sense at all to his parents. Circles, exotic color combinations, and primitive symbols all mixed up with people and attitudes of prayer. Edward, the solitary boy who lives in his 2 years in Brazil, had never once brought his friends home, was now filling the house with strange people, all of them badly dressed and with untidy hair, who listened to horrible music at full blast, endlessly drinking and smoking and showing a complete disregard for basic good manners. One day, the director of the American school called his mother. I think your son must be involved in drugs, she said. His school marks are well below average, and if he goes on like this, we won't be able to renew his enrollment. His mother went straight to the ambassador's office and told him what the director had said. You keep saying that with time. Everything will go back to normal, she screamed hysterically. There's your crazy drug addict son, obviously suffering from some serious brain injury, and all you care about are cocktail parties and social gatherings? Keep your voice down, he said. No, I won't, and I will never again if you don't do something. The boy needs help, don't you see? Medical help, do something. concerned that the scene his wife was making might embarrass him in front of his staff and worried that Edward's interest in painting was lasting longer than expected. The ambassador, a practical man who knew all the correct procedures, drew up a plan of attack. First, he phoned his colleagues, the American ambassador, and asked politely if he could again make use of the embassy's medical facilities. His request was granted. He went back to the accredited doctors, explained the situation, and asked them to go over all the tests they had made at the time. The doctors, fearing a lawsuit, did exactly as they were asked and concluded that the tests revealed nothing abnormal. Before the ambassador left, they demanded that he sign a document exempting the American embassy from any responsibility for sending him to them. The ambassador immediately went to the hospital where Edward had been a patient. He talked to the director, explained his son's problem, and asked that, under the pretext of a routine checkup, a blood test be done to see if there were any drugs in the boy's system. They did a blood test and no trace of drugs was found. There remained the third and final stage of his strategy, talking to Edward himself and finding out what was going on. Only when he was in possession of all the facts could he hope to make the correct decision. Father and son sat down in the living room. "Your mother is very worried about you," said the ambassador. "Your marks have gotten worse, and there's a danger that your place at the school won't be renewed." "But my marks at art school have improved, Dad." "I find your interest in art very pleasing, but you have your whole life ahead of you to do that. At the moment, the main thing is to finish your secondary education so that I can set you on the path to a diplomatic career." Edward thought long and hard before saying anything. He thought about the accident, about the book on visionaries, which had turned out to be only a pretext for finding his true vocation, and he thought about Maria, from whom he had never heard again. He hesitated for some time, but in the end said, "Dad, I don't want to be a diplomat. I want to be a painter." His father was prepared for that response and knew how to get round it. "You will be a painter, but first finish your studies. We will arrange for exhibitions in Belgrade, Zagreb, Ljubljana, and Sarajevo. I've got influence, I can help you a lot, but you must complete your studies. If I do that, I'll be choosing the easy route. I'll enter some faculty or other, get a degree in a subject that doesn't interest me, but that will help me earn a living. Painting will just recede into the background. I'll end up forgetting my vocation. I'll just have to find a way of earning money through my painting." The ambassador was starting to get irritated. "You've got everything, son. A family that loves you, a house, money, social position, but as you know, our country is going through a difficult time. There are rumors of civil war. Tomorrow I might not even be here to help you." "I can help myself. Trust me. One day I'll paint a series entitled Visions of Paradise. It will be a visual history of what men and women have previously experienced only in their hearts." The ambassador praised his son's determination, drew the conversation to a close with a smile, and decided to give him another month. After all, diplomacy is also the art of postponing decisions until the problems resolve themselves. A month passed, and Edward continued to devote all his time to painting, to his strange friends, and to that music apparently expressly designed to induce some psychological disorder. To make matters worse, he had been expelled from the American school for arguing with a teacher about the existence of saints. Since the decisions could be put off no longer, the ambassador made one last attempt and called his son in for a man-to-man talk. "Edward, you are now of an age to take responsibility for your own life. We have put up with this for so long, for as long as we could, but now you have got to forget all this nonsense about becoming a painter and give some direction to your career." "But Dad, being a painter is giving a direction to my career." "What about our love for you? All our efforts to give you a good education? You never used to be like this, and I can only assume that what is happening is some consequence of the accident. Look, I love you both more than anything or anyone else in the world." The ambassador cleared his throat. He wasn't used to such outspoken expression of affection. "Then in the name of the love you have for us, please do as your mother wants. Just stop all this painting business for a while, get some friends who belong to the same social class as you, and go back to your studies." "You love me, Dad. You can't ask me to do that, because you have always set me a good example, fighting for the things you care about. You can't want me to be a man with no will of my own." "I said in the name of love, and I have never said that before, but I'm asking you now, for the love that you bear us, for the love we bear you. Come home, and I don't just mean in the physical sense, but really. You're deceiving yourself, running away from reality. Ever since you were born, we have built up such dreams of our lives would be, of how our lives would be. You are everything to us, our future and our past. Your grandfathers were civil servants, and I had to fight like a lion to enter the diplomatic service and make my way up the ladder. And I did all this just to create a space for you, to make things easier for you. I've still got the pen with which I signed my first document as an ambassador, and I lovingly saved it to pass on to you the day you did the same. Don't let us down, son. We won't live forever and we want to die in peace, knowing that we have set you on the right path in life. If you really love us, do as I ask. If you don't love us, then carry on as you are now. Edward sat for long hours staring up at the sky in Brasilia, watching the clouds moving across the blue, beautiful clouds, but without a drop of rain in them to moisten the dry earth of the central Brazilian plateau. He was as empty as they were. If he continued as he was, his mother would fade away with grief, his father would lose all enthusiasm for his career, and both would blame each other for failing in the upbringing of their beloved son. If he gave up his painting, the visions of paradise would never see the light of the day, and nothing else in this world could ever give him the same feeling of joy and pleasure. He looked around, he saw his paintings, and remembered the love and meaning he had put into each brushstroke, and he found every one of his paintings mediocre. He was a fraud. He wanted something for which he had not been chosen, the price of which was his parents' disappointment. Visions of paradise were for the chosen few, who appeared in books as heroes and martyrs to the faith in which they believed, people who knew from childhood what the world wanted of them. The so-called facts in that first book he had read were the inventions of a storyteller. At supper time, he told his parents that they were right. It was just a youthful dream. His enthusiasm for painting had passed, his parents were pleased, his mother wept with joy and embraced her son, and everything went back to normal. That night, the ambassador secretly commemorated his victory by opening a bottle of champagne, which he drank alone. When he went to bed, his wife, for the first time in many months, was already sleeping peacefully. The following day, they found Edward's room in confusion, the painting slashed, and the boy sitting in a corner gazing up at the sky. His mother embraced him, told him how much she loved him, but Edward didn't respond. He wanted nothing more to do with love. He was fed up with the whole business. He had thought that he could just give up and follow his father's advice, but he had advanced too far in his work. He had crossed the abyss that separates a man from his dream, and now there was no going back. He couldn't go forward or back, it was easier just to leave the stage. Edward stayed in Brazil for another 5 months, being treated by specialists who diagnosed a rare form of schizophrenia, possibly the result of a bicycle accident. Then war broke out in Yugoslavia and the ambassador was hastily recalled. It was too problematic for the family to look after Edward, and the only way out was to leave him in a newly opened hospital of Villette. By the time Edward had finished telling his story, it was dark and they were both shivering with cold. "Let's go in," he said. "They will be serving supper." Whenever we went to see my grandmother when I was a child, I was always fascinated by one particular painting in her house. It showed a woman, a lady as Catholics call her, standing poised above the world, with her hands outstretched to the earth and with rays of light streaming from her fingertips. What most intrigued me about the painting was that this lady was standing on a live snake. I said to my grandmother, "Isn't she afraid of the snake? Won't it bite her on the foot and kill her with its poison?" My grandmother said, "According to the Bible, the snake brought good and evil to the earth, and she is keeping both good and evil in check with her love." What's that got to do with my story? I've only known you a week, so it would be far too early for me to tell you that I love you. But since I probably won't live through the night, it would also be too late. But then the great craziness of men and women is precisely that, love. You told me a love story. I honestly believe your parents wanted the best for you, but their love almost destroyed your life. If Our Lady, as she appeared in my grandmother's painting, was trading on a snake, that indicates that love has two faces. "I see what you mean," said Edward. I provoked the nurses into giving me the electric shock treatment because you get me all mixed up. I can't say for sure what I feel, and love has already destroyed me once. Don't be afraid. Today I asked Dr. Igor for permission to leave here and to choose a place where I can close my eyes forever. But when I saw you being held down by the nurses, I realized what it was I wanted to be looking at when I left this world. Your face. And I decided not to leave. While you were sleeping off the effects of the electric shock treatment, I had another heart attack, and I thought my time had come. I looked at your face and I tried to guess what your story was, and I prepared myself to die happy. But that didn't come. My heart survived yet again. Perhaps because I'm still young. He looked down. Don't be embarrassed about being loved. I'm not asking you for anything. Just let me love you and play the piano again tonight. Just once more, if I still have the strength to do it. In exchange, I ask you only one thing. If you hear anyone say that I'm dying, go straight to my ward. Let me have my wish. Edward remained silent for a long time, and Veronica thought he must have retreated once more into his separate world, from which he would not return for a long time. Then he looked at the mountains beyond the walls of Villette and said, If you want to leave, I can take you. Just give me time to grab a couple of jackets and some money, then we'll go. It won't last long, Edward, you do know that. Edward didn't reply. He went in and came back at once carrying 2 jackets. It will last an eternity, Veronica. Longer than all the identical days and nights I've spent in here, constantly trying to forget those visions of paradise. And I almost did forget them too, though it seems to me they're coming back. Come on, let's go. Crazy people do crazy things. That night, when they were all gathered together for supper, the inmates noticed that 4 people were missing. Zetka, who everyone knew had been released after a long period of treatment, Mari, who had probably gone to the movies, as she often did, and Edward, who had perhaps not recovered from the electric shock treatment. When they thought this, all the inmates felt afraid and they began their supper in silence. Finally, the girl with green eyes and brown hair was missing, the one who they all knew would not see out the week. No one spoke openly of death in Villette, but absences were noted, although everyone always tried to behave as if nothing had happened. A rumor started to go from table to table. Some wept because she had been so full of life. Now she would be lying in the small mortuary behind the hospital. Only the most daring ever went there, even during daylight hours. It contained 3 marble tables, and there was generally a new body on one of them, covered with a sheet. Everyone knew that tonight Veronica would be there. Those who were truly insane soon forgot the presence during that week of another guest, who sometimes disturbed everyone's sleep playing the piano. A few, when they heard the news, felt rather sad, especially the nurses who had been with Veronica during her time in the intensive care unit, but the employees had been trained not to develop strong bonds with the patients because some left, others died, and the great majority got steadily worse. Their sadness lasted a little longer, and then that too passed. The vast majority of the inmates, however, heard the news, pretended to be shocked and sad, but actually felt relieved because once more the exterminating angel had passed over Villette and they had been spared. When the fraternity got together after supper, one member of the group gave them the message. Mari had gone to the movies, she had left never to return. Mari had not gone to the movies, she had left never to return and had given him a note. No one seemed to attach much importance to the matter. She had always seemed different, rather too crazy, incapable of adapting to the ideal situation in which they all lived in Villette. Mari never understood how happy we are here, said one of them. We are friends with common interest. We have a routine. Sometimes we go out on trips together, invite lecturers here to talk about important matters, then we discuss their ideas. Our life has reached a perfect equilibrium. Something that many people outside would love to achieve. Not to mention the fact that in Villette we are protected from unemployment, the consequences of the war in Bosnia, from economic problems and violence, said another. We have found harmony. Mari left me this note, said the one who had given them the news, holding up a sealed envelope. She asked me to read it out loud as if she were saying goodbye to all of us. The oldest member of the group opened the envelope and did as Mari had asked. He was tempted to stop halfway, but by then it was too late, and so he read to the end. When I was still a young lawyer, I read some poems by an English poet, and something he said impressed me greatly. Be like the fountain that overflows, not like the cistern that merely contains. I always thought he was wrong. It was dangerous to overflow because we might end up flooding areas occupied by our loved ones and drowning them with our love and enthusiasm. All my life, I did my best to be a sister, never going beyond the limits of my inner walls. Then, for some reason I will never understand, I began suffering from panic attacks. I became the kind of person I had fought so hard to avoid becoming. I became a fountain that overflowed and flooded everything around me. The result was my internment in Villette. After I was cured, I returned to the cistern and I met all of you. Thank you for your friendship, for your affection, and for many happy moments. We lived together like a fish in an aquarium, contented because someone threw us food when we needed it, and we could, whenever we wanted to, see the world outside through the glass. But yesterday, because of a piano and a young woman who is probably dead by now, I learned something very important. Life inside is exactly the same as life outside. Both there and here, people gather together in groups. They build their walls and allow nothing strange to trouble their mediocre existence. They do things because they are used to be doing them. They study useless subjects, they have fun because they are supposed to have fun, and the rest of the world can go hang. Let them sort themselves out. At the very most, they watch the news on television, as we often did, as confirmation to their happiness in a world full of problems and injustice. What I'm saying is that the life of the fraternity is exactly the same as the lives of almost everyone outside. Willett, carefully avoiding all knowledge of what lies beyond the glass walls of the aquarium, for a long time, it was comforting and useful, but people change, and now I'm off in search of adventure. Even though I'm 65 and fully aware of all the limitations that age can bring, I'm going to Bosnia. There are people waiting for me there. Although they don't yet know me and I don't know them, but I'm sure I can be useful. And the danger of an adventure is worth 1,000 days of ease and comfort. When he had finished reading the note, the members of the fraternity all went to their rooms and wards, telling themselves that Mary had finally gone insane. Edward and Veronica chose the most expensive restaurant in Ljubljana, ordered the finest dishes, and got drunk on 3 bottles of 1988 wine, one of the best vintages of the century. During supper, they did not once mention Villette or the past or the future. I like that story about the steak, he said, filling her glass for the nth time. But your grandmother was too old to be able to interpret the story correctly. Have a little respect for my grandmother, please, roared Veronica drunkenly, making everyone in the restaurant turn around. A toast to this young woman's grandmother, said Edward, jumping to his feet. A toast to the grandmother of this mad woman sitting here before me, who is doubtless some escapee from Villette. People turned their attention back to their food, pretending that nothing was happening. A toast to my grandmother, insisted Veronica. The owner of the restaurant came to their table. Will you please behave? They became quiet for a few moments, but soon resumed their loud talking, their nonsensical remarks, and inappropriate behavior. The owner of the restaurant went back to their table, told them they didn't need to pay the bill, but they had to leave that instant. Think of the money that we'll save on that so exorbitantly expensive wine, said Edward. Let's leave before this gentleman changes his mind. But the man wasn't about to change his mind. He was already pulling at Veronica's chair, an apparently courteous gesture intended to get her out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. They walked to the middle of the small square in the center of the city. Veronica looked up at her convent room and her drunkenness vanished. She remembered that soon she would die. Let's buy some more wine, said Edward. There was a bar nearby. Edward bought 2 bottles and the two of them sat down and continued drinking. What's wrong with my grandmother's interpretation of the painting? Said Veronica. Edward was so drunk that he had to make an immense effort to remember what he had said in the restaurant, but he managed it. Your grandmother said that the woman was standing on the stake because love must master good and evil. It's a nice romantic interpretation, but it's nothing to do with that. I've seen that images before. It's one of the visions of paradise I imagined painting. I used to wonder why they always depicted the Virgin like that. And why do they? Because the virgin equals female energy and it is the mistress of the snake, which signifies wisdom. If you look at the ring Dr. Igor wears, you will see that it bears the physician's symbol, two serpents coiled around a stick. Love is above wisdom, just as the virgin is above the snake. For her, everything is inspiration. She doesn't bother judging what is good and what evil. Do you know something else? Said Veronica. The Virgin never took any notice of what others might think of her. Imagine having to explain to everyone that business about the Holy Ghost. She didn't explain anything. She just said, that's what happened. And do you know what the others must have said? Of course, that she was insane. They both laughed. Veronica raised her glass. Congratulations. You should paint those visions of paradise rather than just talking about them. I'll begin with you, said Edward. Beside the small square, there is a small hill. On top of the small hill, there is a small castle. Veronica and Edward rushed up the steep path, crushing and cursing and laughing, slipping on the ice and complaining of exhaustion. Beside the castle, there is a gigantic yellow crane. To anyone coming to Jublajana for the first time, the crane gives the impression that the castle is being restored and that work will soon be completed. The inhabitants of Jublajana, however, knows that the crane has been there for many years, although no one knows why. Veronica told Edward that when children in kindergarten are asked to draw the castle of Jublajana, they always include the crane in the drawing. Besides, the crane is much better preserved than the castle. Edward laughed. You should be dead by now, he said, still under the effects of alcohol but with a flicker of fear in his voice. Your heart shouldn't have survived that climb. Veronica gave him a long, lingering kiss. Look at my face, she said. Remember it with the eyes of your soul so that you can reproduce it one day. If you like that, can be your starting point, but you must go back to painting. That is my last request. Do you believe in God? I do. Then you must swear by the God you believe in that you will paint me. I swear. And that after painting me, you will go on painting. I don't know if I can swear that. You can. And thank you for giving meaning to my life. I came into this world in order to go through everything I've gone through. Attempted suicide, ruining my heart, meeting you, coming up to this castle, letting you engrave my face on your soul. That is the only reason I came into the world, to make you go back to the path you strayed from. Don't make me feel my life has been in vain. I don't know if it's too early or too late, but just as you did with me, I want to tell you that I love you. You don't have to believe it. Maybe it's just foolishness, a fantasy of mine. Veronica put her arms around him and asked the God she did not believe in to take her at that very moment. She closed her eyes and felt him doing the same, and a deep, dreamless sleep came upon her. That was sweet. It smelled of wine, and it stroked her hair. Edward felt someone prodding him in the shoulder. When he opened his eyes, day was breaking. You can go and shelter in the town hall if you like, said the policeman. You will freeze if you stay here. In a second, Edward remembered everything that had happened the previous night. There was a woman lying curled in his arms. She's dead. But the woman moved and opened her eyes. What's going on? Asked Veronica. Nothing, said Edward, helping her to her feet. Or rather, a miracle happened. Another day of life. As soon as Dr. Igor went into his consulting room and turned on the light, for daylight still arrived late and winter was dragging on far too long, a nurse knocked at his door. Things have started early today, he said to himself. It was going to be a difficult day because of the conversation he would have to have with Veronica. He had been building up to it all week and had hardly slept a wink that previous night. I've got some troubling news, said the nurse. 2 of the inmates have disappeared, the ambassador's son and the girl with the heart problem. Honestly, you are a lot of incompetence, you are. Not that the security in this hospital has ever been up to much. It's just that no one's ever tried to escape before, said the nurse, frightened. We didn't know it was possible. Get out of here. Now I'll have to prepare a report for the owners, notify the police, take steps, tell everyone I'm not to be disturbed. These things take hours. The nurse left, looking pale, knowing that a large part of that major problem would land on his own shoulders, because that is how the powerful deal with the weak. He would doubtless be dismissed before the day was out. Dr. Igor picked up a pad, put it on the table, and began making notes. Then he changed his mind. He switched off the light and sat in the office, precariously lit by the incipient sunlight, and he smiled. It had worked. In a while, he would make the necessary notes describing the only known cure for vitriol, an awareness of life, and describing the medication he had used in his first major test on patients, an awareness of death. Perhaps other forms of medications existed, but Dr. Igor had decided to center his thesis around the one he had had the opportunity to experiment with scientifically. Thanks to a young woman who had quite unwittingly become part of his fate, she had been in a terrible state when she arrived, suffering from a severe overdose, nearly in a coma. She had hovered between life and death for nearly a week, just the amount of time he needed to come up with a brilliant idea for his experiment. Everything depended on one thing: the girl's capacity to survive. And she had, with no serious consequences, no irreversible health problems. If she looked after herself, she could live as long as or longer than him. But Dr. Igor was the only one who knew this. Just as he knew that failed suicides tend to repeat the attempt sooner or later, why not use her as a guinea pig to see if he could eliminate the vitriol from her organism? And so Dr. Igor had conceived his plan. Using a drug known as phenytoin, he had managed to stimulate the effects of heart attack. For a week she had received injections of the drug. She must have been very frightened, because she had time to think about death and to review her own life. In that way, according to Dr. Igor's thesis, the final chapter of his work would be entitled "An Awareness of Death Encourages Us to Live More Intensely." The girl had gone on to eliminate vitriol completely from her organism and would quite possibly never repeat her attempt at suicide. He was supposed to see her today and tell her that, thanks to the injection, he had achieved a total reversal of her heart condition. Veronica's escape saved him the unpleasant experience of lying to her yet again. What Dr. Igor had not counted on was the infectious nature of his cure for vitriol poisoning. A lot of people in Villette had been frightened by their awareness of that slow, irreparable death. They must all have been thinking about what they were missing, forced to reevaluate their own lives. Marie had come to him asking to be discharged. Other patients were asking for their cases to be reviewed. The position of the ambassador's son was more worrisome. Though because he had simply disappeared, probably helping Veronica to escape. Perhaps they are still together, he thought. At any rate, the ambassador's son knew where Villette was. If he wanted to come back, Dr. Igor was too excited by the results to pay much attention to minor details. For a few moments, he was assailed by another doubt. Sooner or later, Veronica would realize that she wasn't going to die of a heart attack. She would probably go to a specialist who would tell her that her heart was perfectly normal. She would decide that the doctor who had taken care of her in Villette was a complete incompetent. But then all those who dare to research into forbidden subjects require both a certain amount of courage and a good dose of incomprehension. But what about the many days that she would have to live with the fear of imminent death? Dr. Igor pondered the argument long and hard and decided that it didn't really matter. She would consider each day a miracle, which indeed it is, when you consider the number of unexpected things that could happen in each second of her fragile existences. He noticed that the sun rays were growing stronger. At that hour, the inmates would be having breakfast. Soon his waiting room would be full. The usual problems would arise, and it was best to start taking notes at once for this thesis. Meticulously, he began to write up his experiment with Veronica. He would leave the reports on the building's lack of security until later. St. Bernard's Day, 1998. Interesting. I kind of got the idea that she was not going to die when he made the comment that she can live up to 50 years as well, or something. He did say something like that. Okay, that brings us to the end of the book. If you have any comments, any questions, anything at all, any suggestions for the next book, You can reach out to me in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section of the YouTube channel. Bye bye for now. Take care. Keep reading. Bye.